Sometimes the most dangerous people in the world look nothing like what you'd expect. They don't wear uniforms or carry obvious weapons. They blend into crowds, order coffee at corner cafes, and smile politely when strangers hold doors open for them. Sarah Mitchell was one of these people, standing barely 5'4" tall, with shoulder-length brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled when she laughed. She looked like a kindergarten teacher, or maybe a librarian. What people couldn't see was the steel beneath her gentle exterior. They couldn't see the years of training that had turned her hands into weapons more precise than any blade. They couldn't see the lightning-fast mind that could assess 17 different escape routes in the time it took most people to blink.
And they definitely couldn't see the classified Delta Force tattoo hidden just below her left shoulder blade, a mark that represented one of the most elite military units in the world. On this ordinary Tuesday evening in downtown Chicago, Sarah was just trying to get home from work.
She had no idea that in the next few minutes, 3 seconds would change everything. 3 seconds that would remind her why some skills once learned never truly fade. 3 seconds that would show a group of would-be attackers exactly what happens when you threaten someone who has spent years learning how to neutralize threats in the world's most dangerous places.
The man who barked those words, "Break her face," thought he was dealing with an easy target.
He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Sarah Mitchell pushed through the revolving door of the Randolph Street office building, the cool October air hitting her face as she stepped onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. Her laptop bag hung heavy on her shoulder, filled with client files and quarterly reports that would keep her busy well into the evening. As a senior consultant for a cybersecurity firm, her days were filled with board meetings, risk assessments, and explaining complex security protocols to executives who thought firewalls were something you built in your backyard. It was a far cry from the life she used to live. 5 years ago, Sarah had been Captain Sarah Mitchell of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, better known as Delta Force. For 8 years, she had operated in places that didn't officially exist, completing missions that would never make the evening news.
She had rappelled from helicopters into terrorist compounds in Afghanistan, extracted high-value targets from hostile territory in Syria, and spent months undercover in some of the world's most dangerous cities. But that life had ended abruptly when an IED explosion in Baghdad left her with a traumatic brain injury and a medical discharge that she fought for months before finally accepting.
The transition to civilian life had been brutal. The corporate world felt suffocating after years of operating in life-or-death situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Yet somehow, Sarah had found her rhythm. The analytical skills that had made her an exceptional operative translated well to cybersecurity. She could spot vulnerabilities in computer networks the same way she used to identify weaknesses in enemy positions. The attention to detail that had kept her alive in combat zones now helped her protect corporate data from digital threats. Walking down the crowded sidewalk, Sarah noticed things that most people missed. The man in the navy suit walking 20 feet ahead kept checking his phone every 30 seconds. Nervous about something, probably a first date or job interview. The woman pushing a stroller was scanning the crowd with the hyper-aware gaze of a new mother, cataloging potential threats to her child. 2 teenagers near the bus stop were dealing drugs, trying to look casual but failing miserably at it. These observations came automatically, a habit ingrained by years of training that had never fully faded. Her therapist called it hypervigilance and assured her it would diminish with time. That was 2 years ago. Sarah had stopped mentioning it during their sessions. The truth was, she didn't want it to fade completely. The awareness had saved her life too many times to count, and even though she was no longer operating in war zones, the world was still full of threats. Chicago might not have Taliban fighters or improvised explosive devices, but it had its own dangers. And Sarah preferred to see them coming. She turned left onto Well Street, heading toward the Lincoln Park neighborhood where she rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment. The evening rush hour was in full swing, with commuters streaming out of office buildings and crowding onto buses and trains. Street vendors were packing up their hot dog carts, and the aroma of grilled onions mixed with car exhaust and the faint smell of Lake Michigan carried on the autumn breeze. Sarah pulled out her phone to check for messages. Her sister Kate had sent 3 texts asking about Thanksgiving plans. Her neighbor wanted to know if she could feed his cat over the weekend, and her boss had forwarded yet another security briefing about potential cyber threats to their financial services clients.
Nothing urgent, nothing that couldn't wait until she got home.
As she scrolled through her messages, Sarah's peripheral vision caught movement in the alley to her right. 3 men were standing near a dumpster, and their body language immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. They weren't talking or smoking or doing any of the normal things people did when they gathered in alleyways. They were watching, waiting. Sarah kept walking, but her grip tightened on her phone.
Joe says this is the book it's about history.
She angled her body slightly to get a better view without appearing obvious. The men were in their 20s or early 30s, wearing jeans and hooded sweatshirts. One was significantly larger than the others, probably 6'3" and heavily built. The other? Two were average height but had the wiry, nervous energy of people looking for trouble. This could be nothing. People gathered in alleys for all sorts of innocent reasons. But Sarah's instincts, honed by years of combat experience, were screaming that something was wrong. The way they positioned themselves, the way they kept glancing at the street, the way they seemed to be tracking pedestrians. It all pointed to predatory behavior. She considered her options. She could cross the street, take a different route home, or duck into one of the nearby shops until they left. All perfectly reasonable responses that would keep her out of whatever situation might be developing. But then she saw the woman. About 50 yards ahead, a young professional was walking alone, completely absorbed in a phone conversation. She was probably in her mid-20s, wearing a business suit and carrying a designer purse that screamed, "Expensive!" More importantly, she was heading directly toward the alley where the three men were waiting. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the familiar rush of adrenaline that had once preceded every mission. She tried to tell herself it wasn't her problem. She was a civilian now, just another consultant trying to get home after a long day at work. She wasn't responsible for every person who might be walking into danger. But her feet had already changed direction. Sarah quickened her pace, closing the distance between herself and the other woman.
As she got closer, she could hear fragments of the phone conversation.
Something about a client meeting that had run late, and plans to meet friends for dinner. Normal everyday concerns of someone who had no idea she was being hunted. The three men had started moving. They emerged from the alley with practiced timing, spreading out to form a loose triangle that would cut off escape routes. Sarah had seen this formation before, used by insurgent groups to corner targets in urban environments. These weren't random street criminals looking for a quick score. They were organized, experienced, and definitely dangerous. Sarah was now close enough to intervene, but she hesitated for a fraction of a second. The old Sarah would have acted without thinking, but civilian life had taught her to consider consequences. What if she was wrong? What if these men were just friends who happened to be walking in the same direction? What if her hypervigilance was making her see threats that didn't exist? The largest of the three men answered that question by calling out to the woman ahead. "Hey, beautiful, got a minute?" The woman glanced up from her phone, smiled politely, and shook her head. "Sorry, I'm late for dinner."
Come on, don't be like that. We just want to talk.
The woman's smile faltered as she realized all three men were now walking toward her. She quickened her pace, but they matched her speed. Sarah could see the moment when the woman understood she was in trouble. Her shoulders tensed. Her grip tightened on her purse and she started looking around for help. There were plenty of other people on the sidewalk, but they were all focused on their own concerns, hurrying to catch buses or talking on phones or listening to music through earbuds. The urban bubble that allowed millions of people to coexist in close proximity also made them remarkably good at ignoring things that weren't directly their problem. Sarah wasn't most people. She had closed within 20 feet when the situation escalated. The largest man grabbed the woman's arm, and when she tried to pull away, he tightened his grip. "Let me go!" the woman said, loud enough that several nearby pedestrians looked up from their phones. "Relax, we're not going to hurt you," the man said, but his companions were already moving to box her in. "We just want your purse and that nice phone. Make this easy on yourself." The woman tried to scream, but one of the other men stepped closer and spoke in a low, threatening voice.
You really don't want to make a scene.
"My friend here doesn't like loud noises." Sarah was 10 feet away now, close enough to hear everything, close enough to act.
They are a big deal today.
Her mind automatically cataloged the tactical situation. 3 attackers, 1 victim, multiple escape routes, numerous potential witnesses. Good lighting, no obvious weapons but plenty of improvised options available. The woman looked around desperately, making eye contact with Sarah for just a moment. There was terror in her eyes and a plea for help that cut through all of Sarah's carefully constructed civilian restraint. "Please," the woman whispered to the men surrounding her. "Just take the purse. I won't report this." "Too late for that," the largest man said. He looked at his companions and nodded toward a narrow alley entrance just ahead. "Let's go somewhere more private." Sarah knew she had seconds to act. Once they got the woman into that alley, this would become something much worse than robbery. She had seen enough in her military career to know how these situations ended when no one intervened. She stepped forward. her voice calm and steady. "Excuse me." All four people turned to look at her. The woman's eyes filled with hope. The three men looked annoyed at the interruption. "This doesn't concern you, lady," the largest man said. "Keep walking." Sarah smiled pleasantly, the same expression she might use when asking for directions or commenting on the weather.
I think there's been a misunderstanding. My friend here doesn't want to go with you.
"Your friend?" The man laughed. "Lady, you don't even know this chick. And unless you want to end up in the hospital, you'll mind your own business." Sarah took another step closer, her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture non-threatening. To anyone watching, she looked like a concerned citizen trying to diffuse a situation through conversation. They couldn't see the way she had subtly shifted her weight to the balls of her feet, or how her mind was already calculating angles and distances. "Look, I'm sure we can work this out," Sarah said. "Maybe we should call the police and let them sort it out." "Maybe you should shut up before I shut you up," the second man said. He was getting agitated, probably high on adrenaline and whatever drugs were in his system.
The largest man studied Sarah for a moment, taking in her business attire and unthreatening appearance.
She could see him making the same mistake that people had been making her entire adult life, assuming that someone who looked harmless actually was harmless.
You know what? He said finally.
"You want to be a hero? Fine. We'll take both of your purses. Consider it a stupid tax." He gestured to his companions. "Grab them both." The woman whimpered, but Sarah's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked relieved. After 5 years of pretending to be someone she wasn't, of suppressing instincts and skills that had once defined her, she finally had permission to be herself again. "Are you sure that's what you want to do?" she asked quietly. The largest man misinterpreted her calm tone as fear.
"Yeah, I'm sure. And if either of you gives us any trouble, we're going to make this a lot more unpleasant than it needs to be."
Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, just so we're clear, you're choosing to escalate this situation. Lady, what the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about choices," Sarah said. "Right now, you could still walk away. In about 10 seconds, that option disappears." The man's face darkened with anger. "You threatening me? You think you're tough because you watch too many action movies?" Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the woman beside her. "When this starts, run toward that coffee shop," she said, pointing to a brightly lit storefront about 30 yards away. "Don't look back. Don't try to help. Just run and call 911. The woman stared at her in confusion. "When what starts?" Before Sarah could answer, the largest man stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. "That's it. I'm done playing games." He looked at his two companions and pointed at Sarah. "Break her face," he barked. "Maybe then the other one will be more cooperative." For just a moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not fear. She had left that emotion behind long ago.
Not anger. These men weren't worth that kind of energy.
What she felt was a deep, almost peaceful satisfaction. After 5 years of pretending to be a normal civilian, she was finally going to get to be herself again. The two smaller men moved toward her, and Sarah's muscle memory kicked in like she had never left the service. Her breathing slowed, her vision sharpened, and time seemed to dilate in the way it always did when her training took over. 3 seconds. That's how long it would take to end this. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. The first man reached Sarah exactly 2.7 seconds after his leader gave the order. He was smaller than his companions but moved with the quick, aggressive energy of someone who had done this before. His right hand was already clenched into a fist, aimed at Sarah's face in a wild swing that would have been devastating against an ordinary victim. Sarah wasn't ordinary. The types of the case is the typo. She stepped inside his punch with fluid precision, her left hand intercepting his wrist while her right elbow drove upward into his solar plexus. The combination of movements happened so fast that to observers, it looked like the man had simply run into her and collapsed. He doubled over, unable to breathe, his nervous system shocked by the perfectly placed strike that had shut down his diaphragm without causing permanent damage. The second attacker was already moving, trying to grab Sarah from behind while his companion was still falling. This was a classic pincer movement, something that might have worked against someone without military training. Against a Delta Force operative. It was a fatal mistake. Sarah spun counterclockwise, using the second man's momentum against him. Her right hand found his extended arm and pulled him forward, while her left hand struck his throat with surgical precision, hard enough to stagger him, not hard enough to cause permanent damage. As he stumbled past her, she swept his legs, sending him crashing into a parked car. The entire sequence had taken exactly 3 seconds. The largest man, who who had been expecting to watch his companion subdue two helpless women, stared in shock at his friends writhing on the ground. The first was still gasping for air, and the second was holding his throat and making choking sounds. "What the hell?" he said, his voice filled with confusion and the first hint of fear. Sarah straightened her jacket and brushed an imaginary speck of dust from her sleeve. Her breathing was completely normal, and there wasn't a single strand of hair out of place. She looked exactly like what she was, a professional woman who had just finished dealing with a minor inconvenience. "I tried to warn you," she said conversationally. "You chose to escalate." The woman she had protected was staring at her with wide eyes, her phone forgotten in her hand. Around them, other pedestrians were beginning to notice the commotion. Some were stopping to stare, others were hurrying past, and a few were pulling out phones to record whatever was happening. The large man looked at his incapacitated companions, then back at Sarah. She could see him trying to process what he had just witnessed, trying to reconcile the mild-mannered woman in front of him with someone who had just neutralized two attackers in the time it took most people to tie their shoes. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Nobody special," Sarah said. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies." The man's shock was quickly giving way to rage. In his world, respect came through intimidation and violence. Having two of his crew taken down by a woman half his size was not just a defeat, it was humiliation. And humiliation, Sarah knew, made people dangerous and stupid. "You think you're smart?" he said, pulling something from his jacket pocket. Sarah's trained eye immediately identified it as a folding knife. Probably 4 inches long, razor sharp, and definitely illegal to carry in Chicago. "Let's see how tough you are when it's not 2-on-1. Sarah sighed. "Really? A knife? That's your solution? I'm going to cut you up so bad that—" "Stop talking," Sarah interrupted. "You're embarrassing yourself." The casual dismissal in her tone seemed to infuriate him even more. He lunged forward with the knife, leading with a vicious upward thrust aimed at her midsection. It was an aggressive move, meant to end the fight quickly and brutally. Against an untrained opponent, it would have been effective. Against someone who had spent years learning to disarm insurgents with knives, machetes, and improvised weapons, it was almost laughably predictable. Sarah sidestepped the attack and trapped his knife hand with both of hers, controlling the weapon while delivering a devastating knee strike to his ribs. The crack of breaking bones was audible even over the street noise. As he doubled over in pain, she twisted his wrist in a direction it wasn't designed to go, forcing him to drop the knife, which clattered harmlessly across the sidewalk. But Sarah wasn't finished. With his arm still trapped, she pivoted and threw him over her hip in a textbook hip toss that would have made her hand-to-hand combat instructors proud. The man hit the concrete hard, and the impact drove what little air remained from his lungs. He lay there stunned and gasping, 3 broken ribs making every breath an exercise in agony. "What? What the fuck are you talking about?" The entire knife disarmament had taken less than 2 seconds. Sarah looked down at the 3 men, none of whom seemed interested in continuing the fight. The first was finally starting to breathe normally, but was still sitting on the ground looking dazed. The second was leaning against the car he had crashed into, holding his throat and shooting hateful looks at Sarah. The third, their leader, was curled up on the sidewalk, trying to figure out how to breathe without moving his broken ribs.
Anyone else? Sarah asked pleasantly.
Silence. The woman Sarah had saved finally found her voice. "Oh my God! Are you okay?"
Where did you learn to do that?
YouTube, Sarah said with a straight face.
YouTube.
Amazing what you can learn online these days. The growing crowd of onlookers was buzzing with excitement and confusion.
Someone was definitely filming everything, and Sarah made a mental note to avoid social media for the next few weeks. The last thing she needed was to become internet famous for beating up street criminals. In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. Someone had called 911, which was both good and potentially problematic. The police would want statements, reports, and explanations. They would run her name through their databases and find her military record. There would be questions about her training, her background, and whether she had used excessive... Sarah looked at the 3 men on the ground and decided she could live with whatever questions came her way. They were all breathing, conscious, and would recover fully from their injuries. In her Delta Force days, encounters like this had often ended with body bags and incident reports that disappeared into classified files. This was restraint. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked the woman beside her. "No, I'm fine. Thanks to you." The woman shook her head in amazement. "I can't believe what just happened. I thought they were going to, and then you just..." "They're not going to hurt anyone," Sarah said. At least not today. The police sirens were getting closer. Sarah could see flashing lights reflecting off the windows of nearby buildings. She had maybe 2 minutes before the officers arrived and the situation became official. "Listen," she said to the woman. "When the police get here, just tell them what you saw. Don't embellish. Don't try to make me sound like some kind of superhero. I'm just a person who knows a little self-defense." "A little self-defense?" The woman looked incredulous. "Lady, I've been taking kickboxing classes for 3 years, and I couldn't do what you just did if I had a month to plan it." Sarah smiled. "You'd be surprised what you're capable of when you have to be." The first police car rounded the corner, followed quickly by 2 more. Officers emerged with hands on their weapons, scanning the scene for threats. Sarah slowly raised her hands and stepped away from the 3 men on the ground, making it clear she wasn't a threat. "Officers!" she called out. "The situation is under control. These 3 men attempted to rob this woman," I intervened. The lead officer, a grizzled veteran with 20 years on the force, approached cautiously. His nameplate read Morrison, and his eyes held the weary intelligence of someone who had seen every type of street crime Chicago had to offer. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Morrison. Are you injured?" "No, sir, I'm fine." Morrison looked at the 3 men on the ground, then back at Sarah. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see him processing the scene. 1 small woman, 3 larger men, all of whom appeared to have been thoroughly beaten. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah gave him a concise, factual account of the encounter. She described the attempted robbery, her decision to intervene, and the attacker's choice to escalate the situation. She didn't mention her military background or her specialized training. As far as the official record would show, she was just a concerned citizen who had gotten lucky. Officer Morrison took notes and asked follow-up questions. His partner was checking on the 3 suspects, calling for an ambulance to examine the one with broken ribs. Other officers were interviewing witnesses and taking statements from bystanders who had filmed the incident. "Ma'am," Morrison said finally, "I have to ask, where did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah had been expecting this question.
I took some martial arts classes when I was younger. Karate, jiu-jitsu, that sort of thing.
I guess it stuck with me. It wasn't technically a lie. Delta Force training did include martial arts, among many other things. Morrison nodded, but his experienced cop instincts were clearly telling him there was more to the story. However, since Sarah was obviously the victim's defender and the suspects were clearly the aggressors, he wasn't inclined to press the issue.
Well, whatever classes you took, they probably saved this young lady from a very bad night. I just did what anyone would do," Sarah said. "No, ma'am. Most people would have kept walking. You chose to get involved, and that took courage." The ambulance arrived as Morrison was finishing his preliminary report. The paramedics checked all 3 suspects and determined that while they were hurt, none of their injuries were life-threatening. The man with broken ribs would need x-rays and probably a hospital stay, but he would make a full recovery. As the suspects were being loaded into police cars, the largest one, the leader who had pulled the knife-locked eyes with Sarah through the window. There was hatred there, and a promise that this wasn't over. Sarah met his gaze steadily until the car pulled away, carrying him toward a booking cell and an eventual court date. "You need to be careful," Officer Morrison said, following her line of sight. "Guys like that have long memories and friends on the outside. I'll keep that in mind," Sarah said. "I'm serious. This might not be over for you." Sarah almost smiled. If this man only knew what she had faced in places like Fallujah and Kandahar, he wouldn't be worried about 3 street criminals with hurt feelings and broken ribs.
I do believe every man you've had before.
"I understand, officer. I'll be careful." Morrison handed her his business card. "If you have any problems, any at all, you call me directly, day or night." Sarah tucked the card into her purse. "Thank you."
The woman she had saved approached as the police were finishing up.
She had already given her statement and been cleared to leave, but she seemed reluctant to go.
I never got a chance to properly thank you,
she said. "I'm Jennifer Collins, Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah, I don't know how to repay you for what you did tonight."
You don't need to repay me. I'm just glad you're okay.
Jennifer pulled out her phone. "Can I at least get your number? I'd love to buy you dinner sometime. Or maybe we could get coffee and you could tell me where you really learned to fight like that. Because I'm pretty sure YouTube doesn't have courses in whatever that was." Sarah hesitated. Her instinct was to decline, to fade back into anonymity and pretend this had never happened. But looking at Jennifer's grateful expression, she realized how long it had been since she had connected with someone, how isolated she had become in her carefully constructed civilian life.
"Coffee sounds nice," she said, and gave Jennifer her number.
As the crowd dispersed and the last police car pulled away, Sarah found herself alone on the sidewalk where it had all started. The street vendors were long gone, replaced by evening commuters heading home from late dinners or entertainment. The city had already moved on, absorbing the violence and returning to its normal rhythm. Sarah started walking toward her apartment, but her steps were different now. For the first time in years, she felt fully awake, fully alive. The dormant part of her that had been suppressed by corporate meetings and cybersecurity protocols was stirring, reminding her of who she used to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Kate. Still thinking about Thanksgiving plans? Sarah looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Let's talk tomorrow. I might have some interesting stories to share." She had no idea how right she was, or how complicated her life was about to become. The three men she had defeated tonight were small-time criminals, but they were connected to something much larger and more dangerous. And in a few hours, when word of tonight's incident reached the wrong ears, Sarah Mitchell's carefully constructed civilian life would begin to unravel. But for now, walking through the Chicago night with her head held high and her senses sharp, Sarah felt like herself for the first time in 5 years. She was ready for whatever came next. The first sign that Sarah's life was about to get complicated came at 3:47 a.m., when her apartment's security system detected movement in the hallway outside her door. Sarah had been lying awake since returning home, not from anxiety about the evening's events, but from the familiar alertness that always followed combat. Her body was still processing the adrenaline, and her mind was replaying the encounter, analyzing her performance and looking for areas where she could have been more efficient. The soft chime from her security app was barely audible, but in the pre-dawn silence of her apartment, it might as well have been a fire alarm. Sarah rolled silently out of bed, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor as she moved to her bedroom window.
Oh!
From the second floor, she had a clear view of the street below. A black SUV was parked across from her building, its windows tinted dark enough that she couldn't see inside. It hadn't been there when she came home, and it wasn't a car she recognized from the neighborhood. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She grabbed the tablet that controlled her security system and quickly scrolled through the hallway cameras. 3 men in dark clothing were standing outside her apartment door. They weren't making any effort to hide their presence, which meant they either didn't know about her security system or didn't care. More concerning was what she could see of their body language. These weren't the same street criminals from earlier. They moved with military precision, took proper tactical positions, and one of them was clearly carrying a concealed weapon under his jacket. Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her as she processed the situation. Someone had connected her to the evening's incident remarkably quickly, and they had responded by sending professionals. The question was whether these were legitimate law enforcement officers conducting some kind of investigation, or something more problematic. She got her answer when one of the men produced a set of lockpicks and began working on her front door.
Sarah moved quickly but silently through her apartment, gathering the items she had hoped never to need again.
From a hidden compartment in her bedroom closet, she retrieved a go bag that contained cash, false identification documents, and a Sig Sauer P226 pistol that officially didn't exist. From another hiding place, she took a small device that looked like a garage door opener, but would trigger a complete wipe of every electronic device in her apartment. The lockpicking was taking longer than the intruders had expected. Sarah's door had 3 deadbolts and a security chain, modifications she had made when she first moved in. Old habits from places where home invasion was a common insurgent tactic. She had maybe 2 minutes before they gained entry. Sarah dressed quickly in dark clothing and soft-soled boots, then made her way to the kitchen window that overlooked the building's fire escape. As she eased the window open, she could hear voices in the hallway. The men were getting frustrated with the locks and were debating whether to force the door. The fire escape was old and metal, the kind that would creak and groan if she tried to use it normally. But Sarah had practiced this exact scenario multiple times over the years, and she knew exactly which parts of the structure would support her weight.
Silently.
She climbed down to the first-floor landing, then used a maintenance ladder to reach the alley behind the building. From there, she had multiple escape routes that would take her away from the immediate area while keeping her out of sight of the surveillance vehicle. But first, she needed information. Sarah circled around the block, using storefront windows and parked cars to conceal her movement until she had a clear view of the SUV from a safe distance. Through her small binoculars, she could see the driver clearly enough to get a good look at his face. He was older than the men at her door, probably in his 40s, with the weathered look of someone who had spent years in dangerous places.
I do believe anybody in a journey could be a little bit concerned about it to be a moment when it considers the driver clearly enough to predict her daughter's childhood family.
His posture and the way he held his head suggested military training, possibly special operations. This wasn't someone sent by the 3 street criminals from earlier. This was something else entirely. Sarah's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number.
Miss Mitchell, we know you're watching.
We just want to talk.
She looked up sharply, scanning the nearby windows and rooftops for anyone who might have her under surveillance.
The fact that they knew she was watching meant they had more people in the area than just the 3 at her door and the 1 in the SUV. Another text arrived. We're not here to hurt you, but we do need to have a conversation about your activities tonight. Sarah considered her options. She could disappear into the Chicago underground, using skills and contacts from her military days to vanish completely. She had enough cash and false documents to stay hidden for months if necessary. But running would mean abandoning the life she had built, the job she enjoyed, and the few relationships she had managed to form. Alternatively, she could find out who these people were and what they wanted. It was the riskier choice, but it was also the only way to resolve the situation permanently. She typed a response, "Who are you?" The reply came immediately. "Friends of friends. We have a mutual acquaintance who would like to speak with you." What mutual acquaintance? This time there was a longer pause before the response came.
Colonel James Harrison. He said you'd remember him.
Sarah's blood went cold. Colonel Harrison had been her commanding officer during her last deployment in Iraq, the mission that had ended with the IED explosion, and her medical discharge. He was one of the few people who knew the full extent of her capabilities and training. If Harrison was involved, this wasn't about the street fight earlier. This was about something much bigger. Sarah typed, "Harrison's been dead for 2 years."
No, Miss Mitchell.
He's been deep cover for 2 years. There's a difference. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind racing. If Harrison was alive, if he was still operational, then her entire understanding of her discharge and transition to civilian life might be wrong.
This is the book. It's about history.
There had always been questions about the circumstances of that final mission, inconsistencies that she had attributed to the fog of war and her own head injury.
Another text. He's here.
In Chicago. He'd like to explain what really happened in Baghdad.
Sarah looked back toward her apartment building. The men at her door had apparently succeeded in picking the locks because they were no longer visible in the hallway.
They would be inside now, searching through her carefully constructed civilian life, finding nothing that would tell them who she really was. The electronic wipe device in her pocket would destroy her computers, phones, and any other devices that might contain sensitive information.
But it would also eliminate her ability to maintain her current identity and job. She made her decision.
Millennium Park, the Bean. 20 minutes, she texted. Creed, come alone. Sarah pocketed her phone and began moving through the Chicago streets with the fluid, purposeful gait of someone who had spent years operating in urban combat zones. She stayed in the shadows, used reflective surfaces to check for surveillance, and took a route that would reveal anyone trying to follow her. Millennium Park at 4:30 a.m. was deserted except for a few homeless individuals sleeping in doorways and the occasional security patrol. The famous Cloud Gate sculpture, locally known as the Bean, reflected the city lights in its polished surface, creating a distorted, dreamlike version of the Chicago skyline. Sarah arrived early and took position where she could observe the entire area while remaining concealed. She was carrying her pistol in a concealed holster, and her go-bag was hidden in nearby bushes where she could retrieve it quickly if needed. At exactly 4:50 a.m., 3 figures approached the sculpture from different directions. Sarah recognized the tactical formation immediately, a classic Delta Force approach pattern that provided overlapping fields of fire while minimizing exposure to potential threats.
The center figure was a man in his 50s, wearing civilian clothes but moving with military bearing. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see the familiar profile that had been burned into her memory during 2 tours of duty.
Colonel James Harrison looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago, when she had attended his funeral. Sarah stepped out of concealment, her hand resting casually on her concealed weapon.
Hello, Colonel. You're looking remarkably good for a dead man.
Harrison smiled, the same expression he used to wear when briefing them before particularly dangerous missions. Hello, Sarah. It's good to see you again. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like an ambush. If I wanted to ambush you, you'd be dead already. We both know that.
It was true, and Sarah relaxed slightly. Harrison might be many things, but he wasn't a liar when it came to operational matters.
What do you want, Colonel?
I want to offer you a job. I have a job. Playing at cybersecurity for corporate executives? Sarah, you're the finest operator I've ever commanded, and you're wasting your talents protecting stock portfolios and email servers.
Sarah felt a familiar stir of irritation.
I didn't choose to leave, Colonel.
I was medically discharged. Brain injury, remember? The brain injury that healed completely 18 months ago? The one you've been hiding from the VA so you can maintain your disability benefits? Sarah's hand tightened on her weapon. Only a few people knew about her recovery, and she had trusted them to keep that information confidential.
How do you know that? Because we've been watching you, Sarah. We've been watching you since the day you left Walter Reed Medical Center.
We know about your recovery, your training regimen, your carefully constructed civilian identity. We know everything. We know everything. Your consistent parties by craving Bobs's. Many people from Germany. We know everything. Why? Harrison gestured to his companions, who withdrew to give them privacy while maintaining security positions. Because the mission in Baghdad wasn't what you thought it was.
You weren't injured by random insurgents who got lucky with an IED.
You were targeted by people who knew exactly who you were and what you were capable of.
Sarah felt the world shift slightly around her. That's impossible. The mission was classified. Nobody knew. Someone did know. Someone with access to our operational plans, our routes, our timing. Someone who wanted to eliminate one of our most effective operators. You're saying there was a leak. I'm saying there was a traitor. We've spent 2 years hunting him while everyone thought I was dead. Sarah processed this information, her training automatically cataloging the implications. If Harrison was right, her injury hadn't been bad luck or the fortunes of war. It had been attempted murder. Why tell me this now? Because we found him, and we need your help to bring him in. I'm not active duty anymore, Colonel. I'm a civilian. Harrison's expression hardened.
After what you did tonight?
Sarah, you took down 3 armed men in a matter of seconds, in the middle of a crowded street, without breaking a sweat.
You're many things, but civilian isn't one of them.
Sarah realized that her street fight had been more than just bad timing. Someone had been watching, evaluating, testing her capabilities. The robbery was staged?
No, that was genuine. But we were monitoring police communications, and when your name came up in connection with an incident involving unusual combat skills, we knew it was time to make contact.
Sarah looked around the park, at the sleeping homeless people, and the distant security guards, at the city that had become her refuge from a world of violence and betrayal.
What kind of job are you offering? The kind you were born for?
One mission, completely black, off the books. Help us capture the man who tried to kill you, and you can go back to your civilian life with our blessing. Refuse, and that civilian life is going to become very complicated very quickly.
Are you threatening me, Colonel? I'm offering you closure, Sarah.
And the chance to make sure no other operators get ambushed because someone sold us out. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She could refuse and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, never knowing if the next IED or sniper's bullet was meant for her specifically. Or she could accept one final mission and put the past to rest permanently. Who is he? Harrison smiled grimly. Someone you trusted. Someone who's been selling classified information to the highest bidder for the past 3 years. Give me a name. Major David Chen. Your former intelligence liaison? Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Chen had been responsible for gathering and analyzing intelligence for their operations. He had access to everything. Mission plans, route information, target assessments, team compositions. He had also been the one who suggested the route through Baghdad that had led to her injury. Chen's been selling us out? Among others, the intelligence community has lost 17 operatives in the past 2 years due to his information sales. You were supposed to be number 18. Sarah's hand was no longer resting casually on her weapon. She was gripping it with the controlled fury of someone who had just learned that a trusted friend had tried to murder her. Where is he?
Chicago. He's here on what he thinks is a routine intelligence gathering mission.
He has no idea we know about his side business. What do you need from me? Harrison's smile was cold and professional. What you do best, Sarah. We need you to hunt him down and bring him in for questioning.
And after that?
After that, you disappear back into civilian life, and we pretend this conversation never happened.
That said guy out audience as Bidgie as 2018 for telling me to discover his own payment to the temple?
Sarah looked at the city lights reflecting off the bean's surface, distorted and fragmented like her own life had become. She thought about her quiet apartment, her cybersecurity job, her carefully maintained distance from anything that resembled her former life. Then she thought about 17 dead operators whose blood was on Chen's hands. When do we start? Harrison checked his watch. Mission briefing is in 6 hours. There's a safe house on the north side where you can get some rest and review the intelligence files.
Colonel? Yes? If you're lying to me about any of this, if this is some kind of test or manipulation, I will kill you myself. Harrison nodded respectfully.
I wouldn't expect anything less, Sarah.
It's what makes you so effective. As they walked away from the sculpture, Sarah felt the familiar weight of operational planning settling over her mind. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell, cybersecurity consultant. She was Captain Sarah Mitchell, Delta Force operative, and she had a job to do. For the first time in 5 years, she felt completely at home. The safe house was located in a converted warehouse in Lincoln Park, disguised as a small import business that dealt in Asian antiques. Sarah arrived as the sun was rising over Lake Michigan, casting long shadows across the empty streets. Inside, the building had been transformed into a sophisticated operations center. Banks of computer monitors displayed satellite feeds, intelligence reports, and real-time surveillance footage from locations across Chicago. 3 technicians worked quietly at their stations, and Sarah recognized the efficient hum of a well-funded black operations facility. Colonel Harrison was waiting for her in a conference room that had been set up with detailed maps of Chicago, surveillance photos, and thick folders containing intelligence reports. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Coffee?" he offered. "Information," Sarah replied. "Start with Chen. How long have you known?" Harrison activated a wall-mounted display that showed a series of photographs and documents. "We started suspecting him 18 months ago when 3 separate operations were compromised in Syria. The intelligence was too specific, too detailed to be random leaks. Someone with high-level access was feeding information to hostile forces." The display shifted to show a timeline with red markers indicating failed missions and casualties. "It took us another 6 months to narrow it down to Chen. By then, we had 14 dead operatives in a security breach that went to the highest levels of the Pentagon." "Why didn't you arrest him immediately?" "Because we needed to know who he was selling to and how extensive the network was. We've been building a case that will take down not just Chen, but his entire operation." Sarah studied the photographs of Chen, trying to reconcile them with her memories of a competent, dedicated officer who had saved their lives on multiple occasions with his intelligence analysis. "How do you know he's in Chicago?" "Harrison clicked to a new set of surveillance photos. He arrived yesterday under diplomatic cover, supposedly here to coordinate with local law enforcement on counterterrorism initiatives. In reality, he's meeting with a contact who's been paying him for classified information." The photos showed Chen at O'Hare Airport, then at a downtown hotel, then entering a restaurant in Chinatown. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his hair graying at the temples, but he moved with the same careful confidence that had characterized his work in Iraq. "Who's the contact?" "Viktor Kozlov, a Russian intelligence officer operating under commercial cover. He runs a consulting firm that specializes in international security assessments. Very legitimate on the surface, very dirty underneath." Sarah memorized the photos of Kozlov, a heavyset man in his 40s, with the soft appearance of someone who preferred boardrooms to battlefields. "What's the plan?" "Chen and Kozlov are meeting tonight at a private dining room in the Palmer House Hotel. The meeting is supposed to finalize a transaction involving intelligence about current Delta Force operations in Eastern Europe." Sarah felt a chill. If Chen was selling current operational intelligence, people she knew and had served with were in immediate danger. "How many operators are at risk? Potentially dozens." "The intelligence he's selling includes team compositions, mission parameters, and operational timelines for active deployments." "When is the meeting?"
8 p.m.
"Private dining room on the 12th floor. Chen will have the intelligence on encrypted drives. Kozlov will have payment in cryptocurrency accounts."
Sarah studied the hotel layout that Harrison had provided. The Palmer House was a historic building in downtown Chicago with multiple entrances, elevators, and stairwells.
Good for operational flexibility, but also offering numerous escape routes for targets who might detect surveillance. "What do you want me to do?"
Intercept the intelligence before it changes hands and bring Chen in for interrogation.
Kozlov is a bonus, but Chen is the priority. Rules of engagement? Harrison's expression was grim. Minimal collateral damage, no civilian casualties, but Chen cannot be allowed to escape. He knows too much about our current operations. Sarah nodded. She understood the unspoken message. If Chen tried to run, if he couldn't be captured alive, then he needed to be stopped permanently. Support? You'll have technical support and surveillance, but no backup on the ground. This needs to look like a random crime, not a military operation.
Equipment. Harrison led her to an adjoining room that had been set up as an armory.
Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she saw the familiar array of weapons and equipment: suppressors, lockpicks, surveillance devices, body armor, and communications gear. "Take whatever you need," Harrison said. "The van outside has additional equipment and will serve as your mobile command post." Sarah began selecting items methodically, her hands moving automatically to weapons and tools she hadn't used in years but that felt perfectly familiar. A suppressed Glock 19 for close quarters work. A compact rifle for longer range if needed. Electronic surveillance equipment. Lockpicks? Zip ties for restraints. "Colonel," she said as she checked the action on a pistol, "I need to know something." "What? If you've been tracking Chen for months, you could have taken him down at any time. Why wait until now? Why bring me into this?" Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Because Chen isn't just selling intelligence, Sarah. He's been building a network of compromised operators. People he's been blackmailing, bribing, or threatening into feeding him information." "How many?" "We think at least 6, possibly more. All current or former special operations personnel who have access to sensitive information." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. "You think I might be one of them?" "No, I know you're not. But Chen thinks you might be willing to become one?" "What do you mean?" Harrison activated another display showing email communications and financial records. "Chen has been researching your current situation. Your medical discharge, your civilian job, your financial status. He's identified you as a potential recruitment target." Sarah stared at the evidence of Chen's investigation into her life. Bank records, employment history, medical files. All information that should have been classified or protected. "He wants to recruit me? He's planning to approach you after tonight's meeting with Kozlov. The street fight last night accelerated his timeline. He saw the police reports and realized you're still operationally capable." "So this is a trap. This is justice, Sarah. And it's prevention. If we don't stop Chen tonight, by tomorrow he'll know about this entire operation." Sarah finished selecting her equipment and began changing into operational clothing, dark, flexible, and designed for silent movement. The familiar ritual of preparing for a mission brought back memories of briefings and forward operating bases, of pre-dawn equipment checks before helicopter insertions into hostile territory. "There's something else," Harrison said as she adjusted her body armor. "Chen's been researching the IED attack that injured you. He's been looking into medical records, debriefing reports, anything that might tell him whether you discovered his involvement."
Has he found anything? Not yet.
"But if he's suspicious, he might be prepared for the possibility that we're onto him." Sarah checked her watch. It was already past noon, giving her less than 8 hours to prepare for the operation.
"I need to scout the target location. Already arranged."
"You have a reservation for afternoon tea at the Palmer House? Your cover identity is Margaret Thompson, a tourist from Minneapolis visiting Chicago for the weekend." Harrison handed her a complete set of identity documents, credit cards, and a hotel key card. "Your room is on the 10th floor, 2 floors below the target."
$5,925.
"You'll be able to conduct surveillance and plan your approach without drawing attention." Sarah tucked the documents into her jacket.
What about afterward?
Second part.
When this is over, what happens to my civilian life?
That depends on you. We can help you relocate with a completely new identity, or we can ensure that your current life in Chicago remains undisturbed.
Your choice. And if I decide I want back in? Active duty? Special operations? Harrison smiled for the first time since she arrived.
Sarah, you never really left. You just took a very long vacation.
3 hours later, Sarah walked into the Palmer House Hotel wearing a conservative business suit and carrying a small suitcase. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what her cover identity suggested: a middle-aged professional woman visiting Chicago for business or pleasure. She checked in at the front desk, made small talk about the weather with the clerk, and took the elevator to her room on the 10th floor. Once inside, she immediately began a detailed surveillance of the building and its surroundings. The Palmer House was a classic Chicago hotel, built in the early 1900s and renovated multiple times to maintain its elegance while adding modern security features. The 12th floor housed several private dining rooms used for corporate meetings and special events. Access was controlled by keycard, and hotel security conducted regular patrols. Sarah spent the afternoon mapping every entrance, exit, stairwell, and elevator. She identified security cameras, estimated response times for hotel security and city police, and planned multiple escape routes. By evening, she knew the building better than most of the people who worked there. At 6 p.m., she began her final preparations. She changed into dark clothing suitable for stealth operations, checked her weapons and equipment one last time, and established communication with the surveillance team that was monitoring the building's exterior.
Control, this is Operator.
In position and ready to proceed.
Copy, Operator. Targets are en route.
Chen arrived 10 minutes ago. Kozlov is 2 blocks out. Sarah made her way to the 12th floor using a service elevator that hotel security rarely monitored.
This is the 2 big guns that are insane, Prest.
She had picked the lock on the dining room adjacent to the target location earlier in the day and hidden additional equipment there.
Control, I have eyes on the target location. Copy.
Both targets are now inside the building. Estimated time to meeting location is 5 minutes. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the hallway leading to the private dining rooms. Through a carefully concealed fiber optic camera, she could monitor the target room without exposing herself to detection. Chen and Kozlov arrived exactly on time. Entering the dining room with the casual demeanor of 2 businessmen meeting for dinner, Sarah activated her electronic surveillance equipment, hoping to intercept their conversation. What she heard made her blood run cold. The American operations in Ukraine are more extensive than we thought, Chen was saying. 3 teams are currently active in Kyiv, and 2 more are scheduled for deployment next week.
Excellent.
Kozlov replied in heavily accented English.
My clients will pay very well for this information. Do you have the team compositions?
Everything. Names, specialties, mission parameters. But this is the last transaction, Victor. After tonight, I'm done. You cannot simply walk away from this arrangement, Major. You know too much about our operations. Sarah heard the subtle threat in Kozlov's voice and realized the situation was about to become complicated. If Chen was trying to terminate his relationship with Russian intelligence, they might kill him to protect their network.
I have insurance, Chen said.
If anything happens to me, certain information becomes public.
Information that would embarrass your government.
What kind of information? Let's just say that some of your operations in Syria weren't as successful as your reports claimed.
Sarah saw Kozlov's expression change through her surveillance equipment. The Russian was no longer thinking about intelligence transactions. He was calculating whether it would be safer to kill Chen immediately.
Sarah had to make a decision. She could wait and let the situation play out, possibly resulting in Chen's death and the loss of valuable intelligence about his network. Or she could intervene now and risk exposing the operation. The decision was made for her when Kozlov reached inside his jacket and withdrew a pistol. I'm sorry, Major, but this relationship has become too dangerous to continue. Sarah moved. She burst through the door of the dining room with her weapon drawn, immediately placing herself between Chen and Kozlov while maintaining sight lines on both targets. "Nobody move!" she shouted, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone trained to control violent situations. Both men froze, their eyes wide with shock. Chen's face showed confusion and fear, while Kozlov's expression was calculating, trying to assess this new threat.
Put the weapon on the table, Sarah ordered Kozlov.
Slowly? Kozlov hesitated for a moment, then complied, placing his pistol on the white tablecloth between them. Major Chen, Sarah said without taking her eyes off Kozlov, you're under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit murder.
Chen's face went pale.
Sarah, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be... dead? Yeah, I know. Your IED in Baghdad didn't work out the way you planned. I don't know what you're talking about. The route you suggested through the Sadr City market. The one that just happened to be perfectly positioned for an ambush. The one that nearly killed me and did kill Sergeant Martinez. Chen's expression cracked, showing the guilt he had been carrying for years. Sarah, you have to understand. They had my sister. If I didn't cooperate, they were going to...
They were going to kill her anyway, Kozlov interrupted, just like we're going to kill both of you. Sarah saw movement in her peripheral vision and realized Kozlov had a second weapon concealed under the table.
She adjusted her aim and fired twice, the suppressed shots barely audible over the hotel's air conditioning system. Kozlov slumped forward, blood spreading across his expensive suit. The shots had been precisely placed to incapacitate without killing, but he wouldn't be threatening anyone for a very long time. Chen stared at the wounded Russian, then looked back at Sarah with a mixture of fear and resignation.
How long have you known? Long enough.
The question is whether you're going to cooperate or whether I'm going to have to do this the hard way.
What do you want? Names. Everyone in your network.
Every operation you've compromised.
Every piece of intelligence you've sold.
Chen slumped in his chair, the weight of years of deception finally catching up with him. It started small, just minor intelligence, nothing that would get anyone killed. But then they wanted more, and when I tried to stop, your sister? They kidnapped her 3 years ago, said they'd kill her if I didn't cooperate. I thought I could feed them misinformation, but they were too smart. They verified everything. Sarah felt a mixture of anger and pity. Chen had betrayed his country and gotten good people killed, but he had also been a victim of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to exploit personal vulnerabilities. Where is she now? I don't know. They move her regularly. Different safe houses, different countries. I haven't actually seen her in over a year. Sarah made a decision that would have surprised her commanding officers, but felt right in the moment. Major Chen, you have two choices. You can cooperate fully with our investigation, help us roll up this entire network, and maybe we can find your sister. Or you can continue to protect people who have been using you and your family as expendable assets.
Chen looked at Kozlov's unconscious form, then back at Sarah.
If I cooperate, what happens to me? Court-martial. Probably life in military prison. But you'll be alive, and we might be able to save your sister. And if I don't? Then you'll disappear into the same system that took your sister, and nobody will ever find either of you.
Chen was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he reached into his jacket and withdrew 2 encrypted drives.
These contain everything, he said. Every contact, every transaction, every piece of intelligence I've sold over the past 3 years. The encryption key is my sister's birthday. Sarah took the drives and secured them in a reinforced case. Smart choice, Major. Control, this is Operator, she said into her communication device. Targets are secure. I need immediate extraction and medical assistance for 1 wounded. Copy, Operator. Extraction team is en route. As they waited for backup to arrive, Sarah looked at Chen and saw something she recognized from her own reflection during those first months after her injury. A person whose life had been completely destroyed by forces beyond their control, trying to find a way to rebuild something meaningful from the wreckage. Major, she said quietly, for what it's worth, I understand why you did it. But 17 operators are dead because of the intelligence you sold. I know, Chen said, tears running down his face.
I know. I've been carrying their names with me every day.
Then, help us make sure nobody else dies. I will. I promise I will. 15 minutes later, the extraction team arrived, disguised as hotel security responding to a medical emergency. Kozlov was taken away on a stretcher, still unconscious but stable. Chen was escorted out in restraints, looking like a businessman who had suffered some kind of breakdown. Sarah changed back into her civilian clothes and walked out of the Palmer house as Margaret Thompson, tourist from Minneapolis, checking out a day early due to a family emergency. The entire operation had taken less than 4 hours, but as she walked through the Chicago streets toward the extraction point, Sarah realized that her life as a civilian consultant was over. She had remembered what it felt like to be truly alive, to use skills that had been dormant for too long, to make a difference in ways that went far beyond protecting corporate data.
We said the book it's about history.
Colonel Harrison was waiting at the extraction point with a folder containing new identity documents and travel arrangements.
Outstanding work, Captain,
he said. The intelligence Chen provided is going to save a lot of lives. What happens now? Now you decide. Clean slate, new identity, different city if you want. Or, Harrison smiled. Or, you report for duty Monday morning. There's a lot of work to be done, and we could use someone with your particular skills. Sarah looked at the folder, then at the city lights reflecting off Lake Michigan. She thought about her quiet apartment, her cybersecurity job, her carefully constructed civilian life. Then she thought about 17 dead operators, and the knowledge that there were more Chens out there, selling American lives to the highest bidder. What kind of work? The kind you were born for, Captain. Welcome back to the war. Sarah took the folder and smiled for the first time in years. It's good to be home, Colonel. As they drove away into the Chicago night, Sarah felt the weight of her true identity settling back into place. She wasn't Sarah Mitchell, cybersecurity consultant. She never really had been. She was Captain Sarah Mitchell, Delta Force operative. And she had work to do. The war was waiting for her, and she was ready to fight. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of a U.S. Papasakasado military base in an undisclosed location, watching the sun rise over mountains that most Americans would never see. The morning briefing had been classified at the highest levels, involving operations that officially didn't exist and targeting individuals whose names would never appear in any newspaper. It had been exactly what she was born to do. The transition back to active duty hadn't been without challenges. There had been psychological evaluations, physical fitness assessments, and extensive briefings to catch up on 5 years of evolving tactics and technology. But Sarah's skills had proven to be as sharp as ever.
enhanced rather than diminished by her years of civilian experience. The intelligence gathered from Major Chen's network had led to the largest counterintelligence operation in recent military history.
18 foreign agents had been arrested across 7 countries. 3 major spy rings had been dismantled, and dozens of classified operations had been secured from further compromise. Chen himself had been court-martialed and sentenced to life in military prison, but his cooperation had been valuable enough to earn him protective custody and the promise that efforts would be made to locate his sister. Those efforts had been successful 3 weeks ago, when a joint CIA Delta Force operation had rescued her from a safe house in Montenegro. Sarah had been part of that mission, leading the assault team that breached the compound where Chen's sister was being held. The look on the young woman's face when Sarah told her that her brother was alive and that she was going home had made every moment of the past 6 months worthwhile.
Captain Mitchell?
Sarah turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez approaching with a steaming cup of coffee and a classified folder marked with the highest security designations.
Good morning, Colonel. How are you feeling about today's mission? Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully.
Ready. The intelligence is solid, the team is prepared, and the target has no idea we're coming. Any second thoughts about being back in the field? Sarah smiled. Only that it took me 5 years to get here. The mission they were preparing for involved the capture of Viktor Kozlov's replacement, a Russian intelligence officer who had continued selling classified American intelligence after Kozlov's arrest in Chicago.
The target was operating out of a compound in Eastern Europe, protected by layers of security that would have deterred most law enforcement agencies.
It wouldn't deter Delta Force. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Collins, the woman she had saved from the street robbery in Chicago. They had stayed in touch over the months, and Jennifer had become one of the few people who knew something of Sarah's real identity.
Saw the news about that cybersecurity conference in Prague being canceled.
Hope you're staying out of trouble wherever you are. Sarah typed back. Always. How's the new job? Great. Still think you should have stayed in consulting, though. You had a real talent for it. Sarah looked at the classified folder containing mission parameters for an operation that would take her into one of the most dangerous regions in the world, then typed,
I found something I'm better at. Well, whatever it is, be careful. The world needs more people who are willing to help when it matters. If only she knew, Sarah thought.
But Jennifer was right about one thing. The world did need people who were willing to help when it matters. It just needed them to help in ways that most people would never see or understand.
Captain, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez said, it's time. Sarah pocketed her phone and followed Rodriguez to the briefing room where her team was waiting.
8 operators, all of them veterans of multiple deployments, all of them among the most elite soldiers in the world. Looking at them, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission calm that had been missing from her life for too long. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez began. Today's target is someone who has been responsible for the deaths of American service members and civilians through the sale of classified intelligence. Our mission is to capture him alive and extract the intelligence he's stolen. The briefing covered enemy positions, building layouts, extraction routes, and contingency plans. Sarah found herself automatically cataloging details and identifying potential problems, her mind working with the focused intensity that had once made her one of Delta Force's most effective operators. Captain Mitchell will be leading the assault team, Rodriguez continued. Captain, would you like to address the team?
Sarah stood and looked at the 8 faces around the table. Young men and women who had volunteered to put their lives at risk in service of their country's security.
They reminded her of herself at their age, before the complexity of the world had taught her that sometimes the most important battles were the ones nobody ever heard about.
6 months ago, I was sitting in a corporate conference room listening to executives worry about quarterly earnings, she said.
I thought I was done with this life, done with putting myself in harm's way for objectives that most people don't understand. She paused, thinking about the chain of events that had brought her to this moment, a random street crime that had reminded her of who she really was. But the truth is, this is who we are. We're the people who stand between the darkness and everyone who gets to sleep safely at night. We're the ones who make the hard choices so that others don't have to. Sarah looked each operator in the eye, seeing the same determination she felt burning inside herself. Today's mission isn't about politics or geopolitical strategy. It's about making sure that the intelligence this man has stolen doesn't get more of our people killed. It's about justice for the operators who died because he sold their positions to the enemy. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we bring him out alive. No heroics, no unnecessary risks, no deviations from the plan. We're professionals, and we do this right. The operators nodded, their expressions serious but confident. These were people who had trained for years to undertake exactly this type of mission. and they knew that Sarah's experience and leadership gave them the best possible chance of success. Questions? There were none. Then let's go hunting. 2 hours later, Sarah was crouched in tall grass 500 meters from the target compound, watching enemy positions through high-powered binoculars while her team took their assigned positions. The target building was a converted farmhouse surrounded by open ground and protected by at least 12 armed guards.
Control, this is Alpha Team Leader. Sarah whispered into her headset.
All positions confirmed, ready to execute on your command. Copy, Alpha Leader. You are cleared to execute. Good hunting. Sarah keyed her radio to address her team. Alpha Team, execute, execute, execute. What followed was 3 minutes of precisely coordinated violence that would never be reported in any newspaper or mentioned in any government press release.
This is the book. It's about history, coordinated violence, executed in any government press release.
Sarah's team moved like a force of nature, neutralizing guards and breaching defenses with the efficient brutality that had made Delta Force legendary among military units worldwide. Sarah herself led the assault on the main building, moving through the structure with the fluid grace of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar operations. She found the target in an upstairs office, frantically trying to destroy computer hard drives containing classified intelligence. "Stop!" she commanded, her weapon trained on him with absolute steadiness. The man, whose real name was Dmitry Volkov, froze with his hands on a sledgehammer he had been using to smash computer equipment. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his 30s, with the soft appearance of someone who preferred to fight his wars from behind a desk. "You are under arrest for espionage, conspiracy, and crimes against American national security," Sarah said in fluent Russian. Volkov's eyes widened as he realized that his capture had been planned and executed by people who knew exactly who he was and what he had been doing. "This is a sovereign nation," he said in English. "You have no authority here." "Today I do," Sarah replied. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." As she secured Volkov in restraints, Sarah felt the same satisfaction she had experienced during her first Delta Force missions. The knowledge that she was making a difference, that her actions would save lives and protect national security.
Alpha Team target is secure, she reported. Copy.